Hey there, fellow designers and web developers. Today we're diving into some game-changing UI design tips that will instantly elevate your website's look and feel. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, these 6 professional design techniques will help you create more polished, user-friendly interfaces. In this video, we'll cover everything from typography hierarchy and color contrast to button design and layout optimization. The best part? These are practical tips you can implement right away to see immediate improvements in your designs. Grab your favorite design tool. We're about to transform your website's UI from good to exceptional. Let's begin. Number 1. Size isn't everything. Relying too much on font size to control your hierarchy is a mistake. It often leads to primary content that's too large and secondary content that's too small. Instead of leaving all of the heavy lifting to font size alone, try using font weight or color to do the same job. For example, making a primary element bolder lets you use a more reasonable font size and often does a better job at communicating its importance anyways. Similarly, using a softer color for supporting text instead of a tiny font size makes it clear that the text is secondary while sacrificing less on readability. Try and stick to 2 or 3 colors. A dark color for primary content, like the headline of an article, a gray for secondary content, like the date an article was published, a lighter gray for tertiary content, maybe the copyright notice in a footer. Similarly, 2 font weights are usually enough for UI work. A normal font weight, 400 or 500 depending on the font, for most text. A heavier font weight, 600 or 700 for text you want to emphasize. Stay away from font weights under 400 for UI work. They can work for large headings but are too hard to read at smaller sizes. If you're considering using a lighter weight to de-emphasize some text, use a lighter color or smaller font size instead. Number 2. Don't use gray text on colored backgrounds. Making text a lighter gray is a great way to de-emphasize it on white backgrounds, but it doesn't look so great on colored backgrounds. That's because the effect we're actually seeing with gray on white is reduced contrast. Making the text closer to the background color is what actually helps create hierarchy, not making it light gray. You might think that the easiest way to achieve this is to use white text and reduce the opacity. While this does reduce the contrast, it often results in text that looks dull, washed out, and sometimes even disabled. Even worse, using this approach on top of an image or pattern means the background will show through the text. A better approach is to handpick a new color based on the background color. Choose a color with the same hue and adjust the saturation and lightness until it looks right to you. Handpicking a color this way makes it easy to reduce the contrast without the text looking faded. Number 3. Emphasize by de-emphasizing. Sometimes you'll run into a situation where the main element of an interface isn't standing out enough, but there's nothing you can add to it to give it the emphasis it needs. For example, despite trying to make this active nav item pop by giving it a different color, it still doesn't really stand out compared to the inactive items. When you run into situations like this, instead of trying to further emphasize the element you want to draw attention to, figure out how you can de-emphasize the elements that you're competing with. In this example, you could do that by giving the inactive items a softer color so they sit more in the background. You can apply this thinking to bigger pieces of an interface as well. For example, if a sidebar feels like it's competing with your main content area, don't give it a background color. Let the content sit directly on the page background instead. Number 4. Labels are a last resort. Put down the accessibility pitchfork. This isn't about forms. When presenting data to the user, especially data from the database, it's easy to fall into the trap of displaying it using a naive label, value format. The problem with this approach is that it makes it difficult to present the data with any sort of hierarchy. Every piece of data is given equal emphasis. You might not need a label at all. In a lot of situations, you can tell what a piece of data is just by looking at the format. For example, janedoe@example.com is an email address. This is a phone number. 555-765-4321 is a phone number, and $19.99 is a price. When the format isn't enough, the context often is. When you see the phrase customer support listed below someone's name in an employee directory, you don't need a label to make the connection that this is the department the person works in. When you're able to present data without labels, it's much easier to emphasize information or identifying information, making the interface easier to use while at the same time making it feel more designed. Combine labels and values. Even when a piece of data isn't completely clear without a label, you can often avoid adding a label by adding clarifying text to the value. For example, if you need to display inventory in an e-commerce interface, instead of in stock 12, try something like 12 left in stock. If you're building a real estate app, something like bedrooms 3 could simply become 3 bedrooms. When you're able to combine labels and values into a single unit, it's much easier to give each piece of data meaningful styling without sacrificing on clarity. Labels are secondary. Sometimes you really do need a label. For example, when you're displaying multiple pieces of similar data and they need to be easily scannable, like on a dashboard. In these situations, add the label, but treat it as a supporting content. The data itself is what matters. The label is just there for clarity. De-emphasize the label by making it smaller, reducing the contrast using a lighter font weight or some combination of all three. Number 5, using contrast to compensate for weight. One of the places understanding this relationship becomes important is when working with icons. Just like bold text, icons, especially solid ones, are generally pretty heavy and cover a lot of surface area. As a result, when you put an icon next to some text, the icon tends to feel emphasized. Unlike text, there's no way to change the weight of an icon. So, to create balance, it needs to be de-emphasized in some other way. A simple and effective way to do this is to lower the contrast of the icon by giving it a softer color. This works anywhere you need to balance elements that have different weights. Reducing the contrast works like a counterbalance, making it heavier elements feel lighter, even though the weight hasn't changed. Number 6, semantics are secondary. When there are multiple actions a user can take on a page, it's easy to fall into the trap of designing those actions based purely on semantics. Semantics are an important part of button design, but that doesn't mean you can forget about hierarchy. Every action on a page sits somewhere in a pyramid of importance. Most pages only have one true primary action, a couple of less important secondary actions, and a few seldom used tertiary actions. When designing these actions, it's important to communicate their place in the hierarchy. Primary actions should be obvious, solid, high contrast background colors work great here. Secondary actions should be clear but not prominent. Outline styles or lower contrast background colors are great options. Tertiary actions should be discoverable but unobtrusive. Styling these actions like links is usually the best approach. When you take a hierarchy-first approach to designing the actions on page, the result is a much less busy UI that communicates more clearly. And that wraps up our 6 professional design tips for improving your website's UI. Remember, great UI design isn't about following trends. It's about creating intuitive, readable, and well-balanced interfaces that serve your users' needs. If you found these tips helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more design insights. Drop a comment below to share which tip you found most useful or if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.